Hello and welcome to the Comic Conspiracy episode 609 for the week of Monday, March 11th, 2024. We have a little bit of a different episode for you this week, but that's okay. We'll get to it in a second. My name is Ryan Higgins. Who else is here with me? The normal cast. Well, normal. Whatever's normal on this podcast.
Toby.
And it's the end of the Okay, so Toby's the end of the normal people on this podcast, and he's not even a normal person on this podcast.
Oh, hey.
Returning regular Charlie.
Yes.
And Charlie is here.
And Charlie.
Sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, Charlie.
That's okay. You just always have to have the and Charlie.
And Charlie. Well, we have two more ands because we're doing a very special episode this week. We'll tell you what that is in a second. He used to have no pants. I've heard rumors that he now has pants. Julian, Titus, thank you for coming back on this podcast. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You know, I'm 44 now. It was time to put the pants on.
Oh, okay. I'm very disappointed.
I knew you would be. I was so stoked when I heard you were going to be on because I have a thing to announce, and this is very good for me.
Excellent. Well, I'm also going to introduce Christian, who has no idea what we're talking about, and that's okay. Christian, say hello.
Hello. Yes, I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, but it sounds hilarious.
That's great. Christian's a customer at the shop, and he's a super fan, so I had to pull him in here. Bless you. I had to pull him in here for our conversation today. We have a lot of stuff to get to. We'll get to all of this. We're going to have really one major topic this week, and that is Akira Toriyama, who passed away this past week at the age of 68, I believe.
Yeah, 68.
Correct?
Yeah.
Now, regular listener to this podcast is like, oh, Ryan hates anime and manga, which is like, historically not true. But when we heard that he had passed away, because he actually passed away, he actually died on the 1st, I believe, right?
Yep, March 1st.
Yeah, and it wasn't until the other day where they actually announced that he had passed away. I was like, all right, I got to call the troops. Like, we get the professionals on. So Toby, old school Toriyama fan, old school Dragon Ball fan. Julian, gamer, also Dragon Ball fan. Christian is like my Dragon Ball guy at the shop. Like, you are the number one Dragon Ball fan I know. And Charlie, you were my previous number one Dragon Ball guy. So between the four of you,
I will at least take credit for all the Dragon Ball Z band Prestos you started carrying.
Yeah. No, between the four of you, like, you guys are my A team. So we're gonna have you guys talk about, and I will also. I have plenty of things to say as well. Surprise. About the life and work of Akira Toriyama, creator of a ton of stuff, most notably the art direction and creator on Dragon Quest, the very popular JRPG series in Japan, and most famously Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z and all the related shows. Passed away at the age of 68 from a what was it? How do you say it? It's dermal hematoma.
Yeah,
I'm terrible at.
Yeah, it's an acute subdural hematoma.
There you go. And I little backstory here for people that maybe aren't maybe a little more Western comic audience, which is our kind of typical audience here, but I don't think, and again, you guys feel free to correct me if you think I'm overstating this here. It's possible Toriyama was like the most influential living comic creator, one of the most influential animators, design style for animation, video games. So much of what this guy did is the basis for just everything that's come after it. And he didn't, he's not the first to do any of this, right? But something about Dragon Quest, something about Dragon Ball is just accumulation of all the knowledge that came before and just set the stage for, especially in America, fandom for JRPGs, and I think Dragon Ball is the start of American anime fandom, right? the modern anime fandom. You have older stuff. You have
to
everything
mainstream for sure.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. You have everything that came prior. You have a Speed Racer and up to Akira, right? You had these things that were popular to a degree. People didn't, Transformers, right? People didn't know this was Japanese. They didn't know the stuff came from, they didn't know anime was a thing. Dragon Ball, when it launched in America, I mean, obviously we can't talk about the Japanese perspective. I'm sure it's, very, very different. But at least here, that was the start of just such mainstream regular television popularity. People know that this is Japanese, that this is anime. This is something. This isn't like some weird American thing kind of dubbed over, right? You had Sailor Moon, the dub, and you've had stuff. It's been there, but Dragon Ball took it to such a different level.
Specifically, Dragon Ball Z, though.
Yeah, right. I meant the franchise.
I know.
Yeah.
I just, considering there is the Dragon Ball show.
Yeah. So for me, I'm there. I think people of, we're all, Christians on the younger side. All of us are in our 40s. I think, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Toby's going to be probably the outlier here, maybe.
I'm 30. Actually, 20.
Not age-wise, I meant because you grew up in Europe, so you probably have a little bit of a different experience. But at least for myself, I had no idea. I wouldn't know for a decade probably who this guy was. But my first experience with his work was, of course, the free copy of Dragon Warrior that came with my Nintendo Power subscription for the NES. And that is the launch of, again, there were JRPGs, quote unquote, prior to Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest. But nothing hit like this. And at the time, I never played a game like this before, right? Never. And I would think a lot of people, more console gamers, American console gamers, had never played a JRPG or what would become, known as a JRPG. So those character designs from the very beginning, was ingrained in what I think of as a Japanese role-playing game, right? But again, it would be years before I had any idea who was involved in this, right? At the time, nobody. That just wasn't something that people like us would know. So Christian and Julian, I'm going to go to you guys first, and then Charlie, Toby, I want to talk to you guys. Julian, why don't we start with you? What's your background on Toriyama, Dragon Ball, Dragon Quest, anything else involved with him? I'd love to know your story here.
Yeah,
and more anime, general anime, or manga, can be added to that as well.
Yeah, well, I'm actually a bit of an anime hipster because I discovered anime, like actually, the name anime, and not just like Voltron or stuff like that, through a cable access show that would run. It was an hour-long show that ran every week, and they would run like a half-hour piece of a movie, which was usually like a Studio Ghibli thing. And then the back half was a completely non-translated anime called Legend of the Heavenly Sphere Shirato, which is like a mystical armor type shonen anime. So I'd been watching anime actually years before, even the VHS stuff was available in the States. But as far as Dragon Ball specifically, I was a big video game magazine reader. That was actually the only way that I could really interact with video games because my parents wouldn't let me have a console for the longest time. And I would see these previews in Electronic Gaming Monthly in the import section for Dragon Ball Z. And I was just blown. I was like, what is this? They're throwing these fireballs. They're as big as they are. And they're going across the screen. And they just look so cool. And I had no idea what it was. I wanted to know more, but this was pre-internet for me and didn't know what to do about it. But it was enough of an evocative image that when my dad took me to this little local collector's show where you could kind of buy comics and toys and all sorts of stuff, there was this guy that had this bootleg VHS booth, and he had fan subs of Dragon Ball Z. And I was able to convince my dad to get me 4 tapes. And they had 4 movies on 2 of the tapes, and then the other 2 tapes were the last like 6 episodes of the battle between Gohan and Perfect Cell, which were actually mislabeled. So I watched Cell get disintegrated, and then all of a sudden he was still around because I didn't realize that I had watched it backwards. But it didn't matter because it was just like one of the coolest things that I'd ever seen. And
this was all before like the tsunami stuff,
oh yes,
right?
absolutely.
Okay.
This was even before Dragon Ball started being shown in the States. So when Dragon Ball started, when it got dubbed and brought into syndication, it was a jarring experience to go from Super Saiyan, this was sub, so Super Saiyajin, Son Goku, all the way down to like this little kid, this little pudgy kid who's like just messing around with a cloud and a pole. But I was still in. Like, it's just the world of Dragon Ball itself is just such an interesting, evocative world where you have like, all this like wondrous technology with the capsules, and you have dinosaurs roaming around still, and you have anthropomorphic animals like just living in society. Like it's a weird, eclectic mix of a world, and it's just really fascinating. And comic wise, like I've been thinking about this for years. It was kind of like Japan's answer to American comics in a way. Like Dragon Ball Z is kind of a Superman story, if you really stop and think about it.
Just his like origin and
coming from another planet, being raised on Earth, and then of course just like being able to do what are considered like superhuman abilities from everybody else on the planet. I mean, there's a few humans that can do it, but not nearly as good as Goku can.
Now, he doesn't give a lot of like interviews, right? I mean, that's something I've read. He's pretty Toriyama was pretty. Has he talked about a lot of the influence of Dragon Ball, like where that stuff came from? I mean, obviously, it's a lot of historical, classical.
It's based on Journey to the West.
Right. It's based on the
like a childhood story that all Asian kids grew up with at their bedside.
Right. No, but I mean beyond that, I wonder if there was any, because at this point, you would have had, Western superhero stuff had, things like Superman had been around, and the 70s movie was popular and everything. I wonder. I've never looked into this. I'm not sure if he had any inspiration from that or not, but it does seem like there is more like whatever I think. Like I don't know. It's hard. You don't see a lot of anime like previous superpowers, right?
Right. And I remember I didn't read Dr. Slump a lot, but I did see an issue here and there was a character in there named Supraman, who was very much a spoof of Superman.
Okay. Christian, you got a comment on that?
Yeah, so Akira Toriyama has been known to, it's been stated in a bunch of interviews that the fine folks over at this wonderful Dragon Ball data website called kanzenshuu.com have compiled over the years, that when he was working on the original material, the manga, he would basically take influences from like many different things that was like going on around his life. Like characters were based on different editors that he had, or he would grab some like small ideas, like obviously not completely plagiarize the thing, but like put his own spin on it. Like if you look at the Cell arc and the Android arc as a whole, you can definitely tell a lot of it was Terminator. And if you think about the timeline, Terminator 2 was coming out around that time when that story arc was being written. So basically just a lot of influences were really like whatever popped into his head based on what he was surrounded by.
And when you're writing at the speed and quickness that a lot of these manga writers and artists have to deal with, I'm sure just trying to come up with stories, they're just like cranking them out as fast as possible. So I'm sure whatever they can take from. Christian, if you want to jump in here, Julian, unless you had anything else.
No, I mean we can probably get to the games later, because that I was when I was watching those VHS tapes, I didn't know the name, but then Chrono Trigger came out and it was like ding, and then I started to notice him everywhere, and I was like, oh, okay, this is this guy is definitely a thing. But real quick, Ryan, I did want to say, like, going back to your Dragon Warrior thing, that was in the day when, as gamers, we didn't really have a lot to go off of, but the instruction manuals would always have like a lot of really beautiful illustrations of the enemies and stuff like that. And that would have been some of his stuff. And I think that's why a lot of that stuff, for people our age is so memorable, because you did, you had the in-game graphics, but they only took you so far. But then you saw what the thing was supposed to be like in the instruction book. It's like, oh, okay, that I get it now.
Yeah. Well, the slime, right? The blue slime is such a perfect, simple design that has stuck with us for 40 years and is just, this like incredibly cute little thing that did translate over so well to the sprites of even of the NES and then the Famicom, which is hard to do. A lot of you come from like the Atari 2600 and you're like, well, I guess that's supposed to be E.T. It's just a couple lines, but if you squint hard enough, for sure. But that slime, like, no, you read that exactly as it's supposed to be. So obviously, it's I'm sure Goku is, will probably forever be, his legacy of, the most memorable character created. But man, I'm going to give him Blue Slime for number 2.
Oh, Slime's up there. Yeah.
That is such a popular franchise. I mean, it's getting more popular here. It never really clicked here the way it did in Japan, but we'll cover the game stuff too. Obviously, Chrono Trigger.
The was the Pikachu before Pikachu.
I could, kind of. Christian, why don't you give us a little backstory? Again, it doesn't have to be specific Dragon Ball, but you're kind of. I'm assuming a lot of us came to him from one of those two places. So, any backstory you have with Toriyama and kind of how you got into him and his works?
Yeah, for sure. So my backstory with it started. It was like around when I was like in 3rd grade. I remember I went to my neighbor's house and they were watching it on Toonami. It was in the Majin Buu arc, and I just looked at it and was just like, what is this? I love it. And then of course, anything that gave me that kind of reaction, I would just dive deep into it. Just like would watch everything. Of course, I was too young to know about the difference between like what the dub was like and the sub was like at the time. But I remember it was really when after I had surgery about like the summer of 2002, and I was given the entire VHS tape set of the first Saiyan arc in Dragon Ball Z. And from there, like it just kind of blossomed into like I needed to know everything. I needed to watch every single thing I could. And over time, it really evolved into like it basically what got me started into my love of anime and comics in general, really, because like I wasn't really that big. Like people, like anybody who knows me, like knows that I'm a huge Marvel fan, and but like it wasn't until I started reading like what comics were like from reading the manga of all things. Reading the manga and just like being really dived and invested in this made me think that like, these are the like good stories are told here. Like you can look at amazing art, and Dragon Ball was really at the forefront of it all. And I'll always be forever grateful for Akira Toriyama for being responsible for something that basically changed a lot of my life in general.
Was Dragon Ball Z like the first anime you ever saw?
Yeah,
that you realized that you kind of knew what it was.
Yeah, I think it was. I believe so. Yeah, because like I think I might have seen some Sailor Moon here and there back then, but like I didn't recognize it was anime because like for some reason everybody I figured this out in retrospect that a lot of people thought it was like an actual cartoon because a lot of people wouldn't really know what anime actually was where I grew up, and it wasn't until I was like a little bit older when I found out this is actually called anime.
And that's pretty typical, right? I mean, this is the story you hear from a lot of people. If you were starting to watch anime in the early 2000s, you probably know it's Japanese, it's anime. But in the 80s and 90s, even the mid 90s, like people didn't know. You had no idea. You had no idea where they made this stuff. Right? It was just like it was the cartoon that was on. Yeah, sure. This is Robotech. This is just the thing that's on. This is a American cartoon. You have no clue that this stuff's made in Japan if you're a kid. Like I said, Speed Racer going back decades, right? So, yeah, it took a while for a lot of people, for the kind of culture to realize where the stuff came from. Toby, I want to go to you because you probably have the most. You grew up in Europe, and your anime was so different there than it was here.
Well, like many in Europe, there were these German and Japanese co-productions. So a lot of us grew up on anime without really knowing that it was anime. There was a Pinocchio show. There's an Alice in Wonderland show. There was the Musket Hounds. I don't know if you guys remember the Musket Hounds. It's like dog, Three Musketeers.
That sounds familiar.
Dude, it was phenomenal. I love that show. There was that one. There was a fairy tale show that was like pre-Studio Ghibli stuff. Like Heidi was like pre-Studio Ghibli stuff. So there were all these shows that a lot of us Europeans just kind of grew up on, not realizing they're Japanese productions or co-production. Because I think the Germans actually paid for some of it, if I'm not mistaken. So I think they're co-productions, but I could be totally wrong. They're basically anime without being called anime. Bine Maya is one of them, or Maya to be in English, I guess, is one of those two. So I grew up on those. So that was when I was still as a kid, I moved around between Switzerland and Japan and Taiwan a lot. So my mom is Taiwanese, so we go there, and my dad worked in Japan. So as a kid, I went between the three countries quite a bit. And so my first Akira Toriyama meeting was so we would go to Taiwan, and I got introduced to Saint Seiya, and I loved Saint Seiya. I was like, this is the biggest thing ever. Brought it back to Europe with me. Nobody knew about it. I was like telling everybody, this is the shit. This is awesome. This is great. And then we went back to Taiwan again. I was so excited to get more Saint Seiya stuff at that point, but all the kids have moved on to like Dragon Ball, and I was kind of like, I can't lie, I was a little like Saint Seiya loyalist. I'm like, fuck this Dragon Ball shit. Like Saint Seiya's like, and the funny thing is like I'm fluent in Chinese, right? But I'm like, there's sayings and stuff that I don't get. So when all the kids were watching it, like the jokes went all over my head. So while they were laughing, I didn't really get it while they were laughing, because Dragon Ball is actually really, really funny. Like there's a lot of comedic stuff in there that, if you don't understand and you're just watching it animated, it was kind of going over my head. And I'm like, why is this so cool? The fights are not as badass as they were in Saint Seiya. And by the way, Saint Seiya was actually badass before they turned into pretty boys in armor. Back when they first started, they were like badasses and beat the shit out of each other. So I was really into the beating the shit out of each other part. But so I wasn't into Dragon Ball. I was like, yeah, this is this other thing that everybody, it's like more popular. They were like, and I'm talking about, I was like 5, 6 at that point, right? Stickers, there were more Dragon Ball stickers around at that point because, it was just more popular at, I still wanted my Saint Seiya stuff, but I did get some Dragon Ball stickers too, and then went back to Europe, and Europe there was a French TV channel called TF1, and I found out later that they had this block called Club Dorote, and they would play like anime and the original Power Rangers, the Japanese ones, and Superboy for some reason. So it was like a block of like 4 anime shows, and it was like a Disney afternoon club. Like I don't know how the Disney thing was here, but it was like a game show. They like there's these hosts, they sing, they had all these kids there, and then they would go, and now we're gonna watch a cartoon, right? So it was like Saint Seiya, Dragon Ball, City Hunter, and then I think it was like Fist of the North Star or something, and then they would end with like a Power Ranger episode and Superboy. And that would be, but it's all in French, right? So once again, I would very much be into Saint Seiya because the fights were badass, And Dragon Ball to me was like, oh, they talk a whole lot, So I wasn't really into that one. And again, this is in French, right? I didn't speak French. I didn't understand it. So I just literally just watch it, right? I don't understand. I just like watch it for the entertainment's sake, right? So, yeah. So that's kind of how I kept up with it. And then you fast forward to when I moved to the States. I was in ESL class, and all the other kids had like the mangas, like the actual little mangas, like the other Asian kids. So I started borrowing them, and what I really fell in love was the art style from Akira Toriyama, because I actually really liked how he drew like all the vehicles, like the little like capsule vehicles and all that stuff. So I really got into that actually. So I was, again, I didn't get into it when it was a cartoon because I didn't really fully understand it. But then when I got the manga, I really, really liked the art. So I got really into Dragon Ball that way. I still was a Saint Seiya guy, but when my mom would go to Taiwan, I was like, I want the two sets. I want that either bring it back at once or or in pieces is Saint Seiya and Dragon Ball. So she did. So I had the entire run of Saint Seiya and the entire run of and at that point Dragon Ball, I remember I was in high school when Dragon Ball actually ended. Like number 42 came out, like the Tonkuban number 42 actually came out when I was like in high school. I remember it was like a big deal, and like all the other kids were like sad. It was like it's ending. That was like mid 90s, I want to say. So that's kind of how it was, how I got into the manga of it. So again, I don't read or write Chinese, so again, I was just looking at the pictures. I really just dug the art style of it. You fast forward another like 5 years is when I started working at another comic book shop, not Ryan's, but the one before Ryan's. And Viz finally was starting bringing out like the English version. They're not like the actual comic size ones, which I never really got into because they were way too short. But
I made that mistake.
Yeah.
I got a lot of those.
So many of them too, and they're so hard to read at that point, right? And like the art was like they blew them up, so the art was kind of not sharp. Like the lines were a little fuzzy because they made it like they were meant for a smaller format, and they blew it up for like American comic size. So I was just not into that one. But when Viz finally like introduced like the Tonkubon size ones, and I bought it, and I finally read it in English, and I completely fell in love with it at that point, because that's the first time that I really, really understood it. Like Chinese I understand, but again, some of the stuff went over my head. Then I watched it in French, didn't understand it, but I was like, I just watched it. I liked some of the stickers and so on, but I didn't really fully get into it until the American, like the English translation, when Viz put them out in the Tonkubon size, and I loved that book. Like the humor is amazing. It was just such a phenomenal book, and I still I'm not a big Dragon Ball guy on the anime. I'm a huge Dragon Ball guy on the manga. Like I absolutely love the manga. Like I to this day haven't watched the entire anime yet, but the manga I've read through like I think 3, 4, 5 times at this point, like the entire run. So yeah, that's my Akira Toriyama love story, I guess. I didn't do the video games all that lot. I did do Chronos Trigger, but for me, it was always the manga for him. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, the manga is incredibly popular. Still incredibly popular. So, yeah, it was not a surprise. Charlie, I want to get a little bit on you. I know you're a big Dragon Ball guy.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did you ever play Dragon Quest? I mean, I know I play video games, but like, you're not a big JRPG guy, are you?
Well, I mean, I'm heavy into like Final Fantasy and such,
yeah.
and I have played at least a couple of the Dragon Quests, but no, I have not like. It's more like I bought a random one for the Game Boy or a random one for this system, not something I kept up with like some of the other ones. But I don't know. I always like fantasy settings and stuff, so it was always sort of an easy. If I had room for a new game and I saw one of those, I wouldn't necessarily not buy it. But no, to me, most of what I kind of encountered him from was sort of the Dragon Ball stuff. But I still find it incredibly ironic, considering how influential the series is, that I still remember watching it on Sunday mornings, and I want to say it was on like the CW or WB or whatever it went by at that point. It was like Sunday mornings. It was dubbed, but it was like heavily edited and it got canceled.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember watching that, being like, this show's kind of weird, but not being like super into it. And then I remember when they started showing the reruns on Toonami, and then the Frieza arc started and everything clicked, and you suddenly kind of understood why this show is amazing. And to your point about like the way that the understanding went, is at that point, Cartoon Network was still finding its sort of voice, really. Most of what it kind of had was reruns of stuff like this that didn't necessarily have a home anywhere else. And it started to get sort of like this identity at that time of, okay, we have an audience for this stuff. And they really, really leaned into it and started front loading like Gundam and that stuff. And they were promoting it as like essentially an anime block. Similar to the way that you used to get into some like PBS stations would be like, this is our 2-hour anime block or whatnot on Sunday night. And I really feel like because of the way that it was promoted at that time is why you got that transition, why people started to kind of understand that this was a particular style and import and that kind of thing. But I always found it really odd, and I know I talked to you a little bit about this, Ryan. Like, I always thought he was older. Like, I never looked up his actual age or anything until he passed away.
Yeah.
But because at that time, in general, there was always this idea of by the time we got anything anime, especially dubbed anime, it had already been out for a very long time overseas.
Right.
And
Right.
going into like Dragon Ball Z, like it was known pretty quickly after that. It didn't necessarily get to the dubbed right away, but they then started going back and like dubbing the Dragon Ball episodes and that stuff to try and take advantage of this huge boost in popularity around like the Dragon Ball franchise as a whole. So like there was already this sense of, oh, this was actually the second series, and the first series was targeted towards kids, so that was probably a long time ago. Compared, like, I don't know. I always find it kind of interesting, just when you take into account his age and when this stuff is coming out. It is amazing, as you said, just how many animes and series and that kind of stuff you can feel his influence in terms of his characters, in terms of the way he world builds and that kind of stuff, in terms of what followed it.
Oh yeah. Well, something we were just saying. I was looking up some dates before the podcast. I just wanted to get some info here. So, Dragon Ball Z in America, right? This is really the start of what coming here. Yeah, it was syndication from September '96 to May '98 before it was canceled. But that was like a weekend show, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I literally remember watching it with like the old like 90s Iron Man and stuff like that. Just that weird kind of hodgepodge of cartoons that were all thrown together on Sundays.
And I think that's why, because I had like no real memory of this being a thing until it hit Cartoon Network. Because I had seen this would have been maybe a year or two prior, some subtitled Dragon Ball. I don't know what it is. I've actually tried to go back and look. I remember talking to Christian about this a little bit at the store a little while ago. I don't know if it was one of the movies. I don't know if it was like a compilation of the first like handful of episodes. I have no idea what I saw. But when Dragon Ball Z started, I remember kind of being like, "Oh yeah, that's that Dragon Ball thing. I saw that. I'm not. That's like a little kid show. I'm not really into that." Yeah, because it hit Cartoon Network in August of '98, and that being like an after school block. That I think is what caused it to become, this massive hit. The Saturday morning cartoon things by '96, I don't know. I feel like the heyday was way behind it at that point.
Well,
and Cartoon Network was like the new hotness, right?
Yeah.
It was like this. It was a little bit more adult. It was a little bit more interesting. And I mean, yeah. So I saw a little bit of Gundam Wing on there as well. That was my first Gundam show, right? I didn't watch a lot of it, but I did see a little bit of it, and that all came after Dragon Ball.
Yeah.
I don't know what their first block of anime was, but Dragon Ball Z must have been in that first block, right?
Yeah. No,
Okay.
I feel like
That's when it
Dragon Ball Z built all that out. Like shortly after that.
Was it? Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
I'm remembering, like, Dragon Ball Z, I think, was the thing that kicked it off for Cartoon Network as far as, like, really, like, oh, this is a thing, right? Capital A, capital T.
Yeah.
But my recollection is that, like, the early stuff was Gundam Wing, like Ryan was saying, Tenchi Muyo, I remember being a really early one. And maybe one other, because they didn't really have a block yet. It was just like they had a couple shows, and then, you know, there would be, like, I don't know, like Courage the Cowardly Dog or something like that.
Yeah, this is kind of what I remember. I remember basically Dragon Ball Z got to the point where it was so popular that they really, like, they started dubbing more episodes because they made it through sort of the replaying what was already out. And similar to what happens on Cartoon Network nowadays, the show starts hitting and it's like, yes, they're playing the same 53 episodes.
Right.
Over and over in like an hour block every day. So it doesn't even take that long to make it through them. So you start making it through like the Frieza stuff really, really quickly. And I remember at that time, that's when they also started to launch like the anime block late at night. So you start having like the edited version of Gundam Wing during the day in that like afternoon block and the uncut Gundam Wing at like midnight or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks to our good friends at Wikipedia, pulled up a nice little list here. Yeah, the first four: Voltron, Robotech, Sailor Moon, and Dragon Ball Z.
Oh.
So that was between early '97 and '98. Yeah, Gundam Wing, Tenchi Muyo, Outlaw Star, Big O. That was all 2000, 2001. I remember Big O. Big O was a big deal, no pun intended. That was a big show when that came out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I remember when that one started too, because it's one of those that put out like the first season, and it was so popular here they started co-funding it for like making more because there was no more at
How
the
many of
time.
you guys were buying the tapes at Suncoast that were like?
Yeah.
Oh, I was. Except it was. I was buying Akira. I was buying
Evangelion.
I was buying fucking shit. What is it? I can't remember the name of it now.
I was excited for my Fatal Fury movies.
I was doing Ranma 1/2 and Slayers.
Oh, I had Ranma. Yeah. What was that? Oh, Bubblegum. Weird. No, I think Bubblegum Crisis I first saw on like a fan sub tape or a fan like tape.
I was just talking to Lane the other day.
I saw that.
Oh, Ninja Scroll is one. Thank you, Ninja Scroll. Well, it was like, so when stuff, I was watching that stuff because, I was 18. I was an adult, right? When Dragon Ball, I was, out of high school when Dragon Ball came on, right? And I was like, this is like, this is like the kids stuff. There's still some cool stuff here, but I was like, I watched a little bit of this stuff, but I didn't really get into it. But I think I probably at this point had made the connection between Dragon Quest and Dragon Ball, that this was the same guy, because I was a huge Nintendo fan. But yeah, I don't know why that didn't translate to me going over and and watching the shows.
Well, I think for me, like, it was just knowing that the show was so long, because like, you got to remember, it was like $29.99 to $34.99 for 2 episodes. Like, it was really expensive.
I still remember that you had to buy some of the tapes at like Burger King or something at one of the time where they were putting out new episodes. But you could only buy those tapes at Burger King along with like the Happy Meal for an extra $5 or something weird like that.
Yeah, there was 2 episodes that were for the longest time that were only available on a Burger King VHS tape.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and eventually and the reason that happened was the way that Funimation used to release the episodes was like you put no more than 4 episodes on a DVD or a VHS, and then eventually they were just like, screw it, we'll just make one of them have 5 episodes. Who cares?
What were those 2 episodes? Like were they like just random one-off nothing? Or
they were total ran off
Yeah,
Oh,
one-off
okay.
nothing episodes. They were kind of the perfect episodes to do that with.
They go to the beach. They go to the hot spring
think
episode.
one of them was Piccolo's driver's test. If I don't,
I was about to say.
yes, it was. It was. That is definitely that's the second episode. I think the first episode has a little bit of stuff that's actually like part of the story, but it's mostly just like filler. It's like mostly just like that one scene just drawn out.
yeah.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, no, Julian, I know you mentioned this a little bit ago, and again, we're just going to kind of talk around all this stuff here. So, any specific stories you want to bring up, history, any favorite episodes, arcs, bring it up at all. But I definitely want to talk some of the video game stuff too, because he was just like character designs, right? So, I mean, he was involved with obviously Dragon Quest and which became in Japan. It never really translated here to America, but in Japan, Dragon Quest set the stage for JRPGs. Really, again, not the first, but it set the stage for what I think everything would come, including Final Fantasy. I don't think there's a Final Fantasy without the success of Dragon Quest.
Oh, absolutely not.
When Final Fantasy went a little harder, Dragon Quest always stayed very light, mostly. But like his character designs, I think translated well to those like 8-bit and 16-bit, the kind of polygon stuff, even to the point of the newest Dragon Quest game. It launched with a full like 8 or 16-bit like version, right? So like you could play it like a classic Dragon Quest game, like an 8-bit and like an NES game or Super Nintendo game, or you could play it with like all the modern graphics. And even when it went like 3D, again, his animation, his characters translate so well to animation that translation to 3D is perfect, right? Like that, it didn't. People love Final Fantasy, but it took them a little while. Those early Final Fantasy games a little blocky. The Final Fantasy 7 and 8. It took them a while to really get it. But Dragon Quest, I think just they're not simple. They're just more in line with kind of animation than the really complex designs of Final Fantasy characters.
Yeah,
I mean, I love all the artwork of Final Fantasy games, but the games just don't look like that. They never can. You can't put what's his face's art style into a video game and not translate very well. But Chrono Trigger, never a colossal seller the way Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest were and everything like that. But easily one of the most kind of well revered and influential like action RPGs. It split the difference between JRPGs and more traditional action games, and it kind of, again, I don't think it was the first to do it, but it really influenced so many games that came after it.
Oh, for sure. And yeah, I think the thing about Toriyama's art is that it's very clean, and it definitely like once we got like cell shading in 3D like video game graphics, like his stuff just started to like pop, right? Like I came to Dragon Quest very late. Like I probably rented like a couple of the Dragon Warrior games on the Nintendo like back in the day, and they were like impenetrable to me at that point. So Dragon Quest VIII was actually the first one that I actually bought and played, and that was like the first like fully 3D Dragon Quest game, and like his art just like mapped to those character models so well. And that was also when like you started to get like the Dragon Ball Z like fighting games started to get like really like great graphics at that point. And then you flash forward 10 years or so, or more than that, 20 years, and you get to Dragon Ball Fighters, on like the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, where it's like it's a goddamn Dragon Ball anime that I'm controlling now. Like, this is amazing. I
know Christian's a big fan of the games. Charlie, I think you played those too, right? Like the Dragon Ball games.
Yeah, I've definitely played 4 or 5 of them, but there's so many of them.
Yeah.
I played all of them at least once. Even the bad ones.
And there's a lot.
So
There's a lot of bad ones.
Oh my god! Yeah.
My favorite was the Game Boy Advanced Dragon Ball, I think.
Oh, Dragon Ball Advanced Adventure. Yeah,
That one was really good.
that was so good.
The Dragon Ball game on GBA is excellent. It's like this really fun side-scrolling platform game.
Yeah, that's the one I meant to. Yeah, that's the one. I mean.
Yeah, I love that one.
Amazing game. That's an amazing game.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it does such a good job of like condensing like the entire story of Dragon Ball from like the very beginning with Goku meeting Bulma all the way to the end of King Piccolo, like when he defeats him, without making it feel like all truncated into one small package.
Yeah. And I worked at an independent video game store from like 1997 to 2005. And one of the big, obviously, as Dragon Ball started to rise, like that was like the prime time, right? And so we sold shitloads of the 3 import PlayStation 1 Dragon Ball games. And I'm salty about it to this day because they translated the 2 worst ones over and released them in America, but we never got Dragon Ball Z Legends, which is still one of my favorite Dragon Ball games because it's like this really like weird like 3-on-3 fighting game, but like the sprites are very small and you're on a 3D background, but it actually let you do the stuff that you would see in the anime where you could do like the teleport behind the guy and hit him and send him flying like hundreds of feet towards the left and then teleport below him and knock him into the air and then get above him and slam him back down to the ground. And then once you would like charge up a meter, it would cut to like whichever character you were using at the time doing one of their big, key moves. And it's still just like really awesome to play. But like we never got that one here. We got the shitty ones.
Honestly, what I'm trying to remember right now in terms of Dragon Ball Z games, and I'm wondering if one of you will remember this, is I remember at the height of the popularity, somebody was working on a mod, let's say using the Unreal Engine, but my brain's spacing for sure if it was that or one of the Quake engines. But they were doing a mod with all the DBZ characters and the ability to go Super Saiyan and all that, and they got basically a cease and desist over it, so they were not able to release it as officially a Dragon Ball game. But then they just released everything they had done anyways. They just took out all mention of the character names, but it was still the same character designs. You could still go Super Saiyan. You could still fight Frieza. Like, it was a full-on fun Dragon Ball game.
I remember in high school, like a friend bringing his laptop with some sort of Quake mod. I don't know if it was that specific one, but because me and my nerd crew, like at the cafeteria table, we wanted to do like some sort of Doom mod. For Dragon Ball. And I still have like a sketchbook somewhere where I was like, okay, yeah, so this is how we'll do like Broly and stuff like that. And I had like kind of frames of animation like sketched out and, how we would map like the weapons, like what moves would be what weapon. But of course, we didn't know anything about like actually modding Doom. So that's as far as we got.
I always found it fascinating because at the time when that came out, it was so much better than any other like game that seemed to be coming out. That it was like the first time I really came across a mod for a game that felt so polished, it literally could have been released as a game.
Right.
Because like at the time, there wasn't that much modding going out there, let alone anything that got that polished. Like it was shortly after that I think it was Counter-Strike first started to really take off too as a mod. But I always found that kind of funny that one of the best games I ever played was not a official release.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, he was just, it was really cool. Like, I'm still on the hellscape that asshole owns. But it was really cool to see my feed for the last few days just be like unanimous, like Toriyama, like praise and inspiration. And I actually like got like a lot of really interesting tidbits about like some of the stuff that he did influence. And one of the really fun things that I saw was there was like a panel in Dr. Slump where he drew a bunch of kaiju like Godzilla and like Ghidorah and Gamera in like kind of little cute squished form, which had not been done before, which then got coined as Super Deformed, or SD, which then would go on to just become an art style, which is also like kind of the art style of those first 6 Final Fantasy games. They have the little, the big heads, the squash bodies.
Yeah.
And so, like just that style alone, right? Like it was like just this one-off gag in his comic, but then it spawns an entire cottage industry of things, right? Just things like that, and just seeing like, his character designs starting to proliferate in video games, and then getting savvy enough to like start to actually notice it, right? I think for me, the first game where I was like, oh, that's Toriyama doing the character designs was actually Tobal #1 on the PlayStation 1, which is like a 3D fighting game from Square Enix, or would have been Squaresoft back then. But like I remember like seeing like the previews, and even before I read the thing, I was like, oh, that's the Dragon Ball guy. That I know that art.
His art is you can tell it from a mile away,
Yes.
right? I mean, you're never going to mistake Toriyama's art for anyone else, which is great. It's a lot of times you get artists who are just like, well, okay, this kind of looks like a lot of stuff, right? But his style is so unique. It kind of even feels like an anime and manga. Like you don't see people are inspired by him, but like that's a tough style to copy. Like I don't think it would translate well if a lot of people tried to draw
but
like
he
that.
inspired a lot of people, though. If you just go read what all the other manga creators of today's are saying about him, I don't want to read any of them because I got a little teary-eyed just reading them, man. But they all, like, I mean, he was the master. Like,
it
was incredible to read. Like, the guy who created Naruto wrote something. The guy who created One Piece, all the current creators have wrote something about it, and it's incredible what they all wrote. Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to talk for Japan because I don't know specifically. I know here, right, Dragon Ball, it's got to be more popular now than it ever has been, right? Like it just feels like it has just continued to build fans, get new fans. New shows. It's actually a question, right? So I don't know. Maybe you guys know the answer to this. Obviously, with the manga, I mean, it's all him, right? I mean, like they have their support staff and stuff like that, but it's pretty much usually done by one person or one group of people.
Well, they have assistants.
What's that?
They have assistant.
Right.
Some of the background or and so on.
Yeah.
It was incredible. I didn't find out till recently. I know this is a little side tangent. One of my favorite is Slam Dunk, and that creator was an assistant on the guy who did City Hunter. And I had no idea, but the minute I realized that they had a connection, it made total sense.
You could see it.
Oh my god, it's so there between the two main characters, how they go from very serious to like super goofy, and it's like the connection is so strong between the two. I was like, it's incredible, and I never made the connection because it's in your face. The minute I realized it, I was like, holy shit, this makes so much sense, because most other people didn't really do it the way they did. So I thought that was incredible.
So when they're making the manga, obviously, again, it's pretty much all him. But when it comes to things like the games, the movies, the anime, you have filler episodes, you have all these other people involved. How involved, if you guys know, how involved was he on that other stuff? Obviously, the anime was coming out when the manga was still happening, so you got to kind of meander around for a while and jump around. Was he pretty active, involved in the anime, in the movies that were coming out as well, and then later the video games, or was he kind of like a little hands off on that stuff?
Off and on.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. So from many interviews that I've read that were translated from once again the fine folks at Consentry.com, he would basically they would basically come to him for like a couple of stuff and be like, hey, what do you got idea for this? And then he'd be like, oh, well, all right. I mean, I all right, this design's cool, but what if you do something like this, this, and that? But he was mostly just like, it was like a lot of like the anime only stuff. He would pretty much be completely hands off except for like initial designs and maybe like a little bit ideas, but like stuff like the movies, like the story, that was all completely the anime staff. I believe if my memory recalls me correctly, like a lot of the initial designs for the anime only series GT were done by him for how Goku looks, how Pan looks, how Trunks looks. The little robot companion Giru who kind of accompanies them around, that was all done by him, as well as some of the planets that they visit in those first couple episodes. But after that, it was pretty much all animes, all the anime staff.
And GT is the one they all hate, right?
Yeah, GT's the one that he didn't shepherd the story pretty much at all. Like the initial pitch.
Yeah, GT is GT. Let's put it that way.
I actually liked it just because I was always a fan of Young Goku. So I actually kind of liked them going. Well, the storyline was weird as hell, but I liked Young Goku, so I was up for more Young Goku adventures. So
yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. There's definitely some good stuff about GT. Like the Super Saiyan 4 design is like really well done, and there are definitely some interesting ideas, but honestly, it's like, in my opinion, it's like the execution was completely poor.
I mean, in general, he shepherded a vision for this world up until GT, and then GT had somebody else, and it just felt like it wasn't him.
Right.
And to me, that's where, when you got into like the movies and Super and that stuff, he was back sort of shepherding the story that was being told. And like even some of the more recent movies, he was much more involved in. Like, I would say that's one of those things that's very common amongst sort of like animes in general, is a lot of times the movies are the places where the creatives have very little control over it because they're not based on any of the works that have sort of been pre-done. He's one of those sort of few people that started sort of shepherding some of the more like the Dragon Ball Super movies all seem to be sort of like shepherded by him in some shape or form to make sure that the story and everything aligned. And then he was working on something new for the anniversary.
Yeah, Daima.
Yeah,
and that's still coming out, right? I mean, that's
so. It was recently it was either revealed today or yesterday. It's going to officially start premiering on Fuji TV this coming fall.
Okay.
Yeah, he wasn't slowing down, like he was working on, that new manga and anime Sandland, and there's like a video game coming out of that this year. And yeah, he had been like a lot more involved in the Dragon Ball Super stuff. And it was just so like shocking to hear that he passed, because like I felt that we were going to have like him and his, like his direct influence for like another 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, he's done other stuff, right? I mean, Dr. Slump was kind of his big first breakout hit. I know, Toby, you've picked him up. I know it's on your list to get to, but I know you like the art on that a lot.
I love the art on that one. So yeah, I started picking him up. The only problem is when you collect things like I do, you're not as organized. So a couple books are in box somewhere. Some are on my bookshelf. Randomly have 2 number 4s for some reason. So once I have everything put together in one set, which I have actually, then I'll read through it, because I actually can't wait to read through that.
Sandland was another one that I thought was kind of interesting, because I remember when this came out. It was 2000, right? I'm looking up here. Yeah, it's 2000. I remember like the Viz manga for this coming out.
I thought it was like much more recent than that.
Shonen Jump. I think it ran in. I was looking it up here. Japan, it ran in 2000.
Oh.
But yeah. So I remember. I mean, that came out here, and it was like, oh yeah, they got it a Dragon Ball. And they just announced a video. Well, I don't know when they announced it, like a year ago or something. But the video game's coming out for this. I've like no context for what the game is. It's like I'm assuming it's like an RPG or something. But I was like, what? Where did this come from?
Yeah, I've actually played a little bit when I was at New York Comic Con this past fall, and it's basically like it's kind of like It's kind of like an open world action RPG, but with like more like shooting elements. It's kind of like if Call of Duty had a baby with an open world RPG.
It's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, he did not, stop at Dragon Ball and kind of just, cash his checks. No, he was still doing a ton of stuff, which, I can't imagine in the heyday, because Dragon Ball Z ended, the show ended in Japan, and then it started here. The manga went. I don't have the dates in front of me anymore. I don't remember when the manga ended. But trying to do arguably the most popular anime and the most popular manga at the same time, it's a crazy amount of work. And then these things don't last the mangas are every week. They go for years, right? So it ran for such a long time between Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. We took a big break, obviously, till Super and the new stuff came out. But it's impressive history.
The manga ended on May 23rd, 1995.
Okay, yeah, because I think the show ended at mid '96, so it was running pretty concurrently, and then we got it shortly after.
I guess just to sort of state it, I do find it kind of amazing that you had Dragon Ball Z, then they went back and kind of redubbed the original Dragon Ball, then they redubbed the first edited episodes that they did. Like they dubbed it again with the voice cast that they used when they continued with the Frieza arc. Then they put out the Dragon Ball Z Kai, which was Dragon Ball Z minus the filler. Like there was such an appetite for Dragon Ball stuff that even though there was sort of that slump between Z and Super, it's not like Dragon Ball stuff stopped coming out. They just became more and more desperate for how could they keep it going.
No, 100%. It has been, and I especially, again, in Japan, it's a little bit different. I don't have, we're not there, so I won't speak. But I still saw a ton when I was there during the summer. I still saw Dragon Ball stuff there, like everywhere. But here, there's never been a slowdown. There maybe hasn't been new content, but there has been figures, games. The show runs endlessly. I don't know what the last block was. I'm sure it's probably being shown somewhere right now. I have no idea where. And then when the show finishes kind of its original, because it comes back on. I was looking earlier; it goes back on Toonami, 2008. You kind of start getting internet culture. Kids who grew up with it are now becoming adults. Streaming services start to happen. And fans, between you don't have to trade tapes anymore. Now you're downloading full Japanese fan translated episodes online, and I'm sure just gave Dragon Ball and his other works just another humongous fan base of people that weren't around, that never had the chance to see it when it was originally airing on TV here.
Yeah,
let's not forget early YouTube with Dragon Ball Z anime music videos to Linkin Park, right? Like that. That kind of
all
was
those
a pretty big
AMVs,
thing.
man. Yeah. Anime conventions, everything, right? I mean, that's never gone away here. Even if there hasn't been new shows.
Yeah, not only that, but there was also even the official releases were releasing the original Japanese. The original Japanese. I don't want to say it. With the original Japanese production with. With all the
Subtitled and
everything. I don't know why I was totally blanking. So you have people who are people who are excited about watching the English dub who are then looking at the Japanese dub and are just like, oh, what is this? And then they hear the differences, and then that brings in a whole nother new set of a whole nother side of the fandom to American audiences.
Yeah, Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z is one of the few anime that I refuse to watch dubbed. Nothing against the American voice actors. It's just because of my exposure to those fan sub tapes. That is the cast to me. So it's it's really off-putting for me to hear Goku not sound like a woman. And I don't know. It's very. No one does the Kamehameha the way that she does, and that's always been like my thing with Dragon Ball. But like I said, I watch most of my anime dubbed, but can't do it on that. Just can't.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I absolutely love the Japanese dub. Masako Nozawa is amazing. Is an amazing voice actress. Like her level of like commitment that she's done with Dragon Ball in general is something really worth praising.
Yeah.
It's just that and for a while before Dragon Ball Kai, I was like, once I found out about the Japanese version, that would be the only thing I would watch. I would never watch the dub because then I always thought the dub was like completely off script. It wasn't like fully faithful. And then when Kai was coming out, and I was reading a lot of stuff about how Funimation were actually taking the chance to do it right, to do a much better job, to be more faithful. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll give it a chance. And I ended up watching the Kai dub, and I was just like, oh, this is actually very, very faithful and very accurate. And then I kind of grew to appreciate everything that they do because you could tell that they definitely had a passion and a love for it that was not being shown at first, because at first, they were just doing it. Okay, this is a thing that we can do to like possibly make money, probably put this on American airwaves. But like you could definitely even just by watching the English dub of like anything from starting from the original Dragon Ball Z Kai, which was I believe in 2009 when it came out in America, to now, you can tell how much passion everybody who works on it has for Akira Toriyama's work.
For sure.
Yeah. I will say that I crossed between sort of the dub and the sub, but most of that always had to do with I'd watch it to a point, and then the only way I could keep watching it was subtitled. Just because I'm not patient enough to wait for more of them to get dubbed. And that's how I watch so many animes at this point. Like, they'll get me started on the dub, and then I'll be impatient, and I'll just keep up with the sub.
Well, at this point, aren't they even doing like simul dub for some shows?
Yeah, but most of those are like 1 or 2 episodes behind. Like, it's not like full on simultaneous.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not patient enough to wait 2 weeks for the next dub if I can just watch the next one.
Yeah. And some shows are still agonizingly long waits for the dubs. I'll catch up on My Hero Academia like on Hulu, and then it's like, and now I wait. And then I think like right now they're doing like Spy Family season 2, but it's only subtitles, and I'm like, I really love the dub cast on this, so I'm just going to wait until that comes out.
Yeah.
I mean, I watch both honestly for the same reason, just because I'm an impatient person.
Yeah, again, I'll kind of restate what I said at the beginning of the episode. Even someone like me, that's again, it's impossible to not know who Toriyama was and his work. I've never considered myself a major fan, but I appreciate the hell out of Dragon Ball and the guy's work and the fan base that's built up in America and the dedication. But I don't think that there's really a question. Very few American comic creators, reach the sort of level of like national recognition that someone like Toriyama's work did. The MCU and like Stan Lee is probably the closest we had. I mean, normal human beings know who Stan Lee is here, right? Dragon Ball it was such a big thing and influenced so much that came after it. It's really hard to think of someone else that was as, Miyazaki was close for animation, right? Miyazaki probably beats him in animation, but that's, because that's what he does, right? Toriyama's not an animator, right? There is just, it is tough to think of another comic creator.
And I was gonna
with the level of influence that Toriyama had.
This is a weird correlation, but I mean he's not as big as Walt Disney, but his reach that he had over the world gets pretty damn close. I mean, we got a bunch of people out here from I grew up in Europe, and most of the folks here are from the States. But you talk to any like South American guys that, dude, Dragon Ball was the world. Like,
Yep.
how big Dragon Ball was in South America is like unfathomable. Like, there's so many, Hispanic kids. They're like, it's.
I have this group of about 5 guys that come into the store. But once a month, they buy every single Dragon Ball figure we have when they come in.
Yeah.
And they just buy, and they don't speak a lick of English, right?
Yeah.
And they buy everything Dragon Ball, and then they leave. And then I see them like a month later, and we'll get a few more of those Banpresto figures or another manga or something, and they'll just buy them all.
Yeah.
Like it is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's like for someone that created something that's worldwide known. Like, look, it was big in France, obviously. Like, at the time I left Switzerland, at that point they knew about it. I'm sure it's actually big there now, right? It's huge here in the States. It's huge in South America. Like, it is known all over the place for something that's like, a comic from Japan. Like that, it started as a comic from Japan. So I think that's insane. Yeah.
Oh, no, it's amazing. And, he touched so many, like, industries and people, right? So, like, of course, you've got the comic book side, right? Like, a lot of comic book artists, grew up, like, a lot of the big comic book artists that are hot right now, right, grew up with that influence.
Toby, your buddy Philip was, like...
Oh, dude.
I thought he was... you could feel the tears on his posts. Yeah, your buddy Philip Tan. Yeah.
Philip, like I said, dude, there's so many creators have put posts down that I wanted to read tonight on this podcast, but I can't do it, man. It just gets you teary-eyed because you can tell how much what Akira meant to them. So
yeah. And it spills over into video games, of course, movie and animation and stuff like that. But then even like stranger places that you might not think, right? So like I'm a wrestling fan, and for a good while I was like really deep into like the indie wrestling scene here in Austin. And it was crazy starting to get to know some of these wrestlers and realizing, these guys are nerds. Like they're into like the same stuff that I am. And like,
I mean, like this is mainstream wrestling, but didn't Ronda Rousey wear like a Vegeta shirt when she was in the Levi Stadium with The Rock?
Oh yeah, and the New Day, like you'll see it all over, and like so I got to know like Keith Lee, who he's now a big like worldwide known wrestler, but I knew him when he was just like a Texas guy, and like his finishing move is called the Spirit Bomb, right? And like he would refer to himself as a Saiyan, and it's this dude that's like you don't want to mess with when you see him. It's like that's a big dude, but he's also just like the biggest nerd, and it's like. It's amazing. It's something that like really brings people together. And like I said, like on a website that's known for just like people just like sniping at each other incessantly day in and day out. Like my feed has just been nothing but like Toriyama stories and art and anecdotes and stuff like that. And it's just so heartwarming.
Yeah.
Well, that's good tribute, I think. Any last minute things, Christian? You're our mega fan here, I know for sure. Well, you and Julian and Charlie. You regale me with tons of cool Dragon Ball stuff. Right now, if someone wants it, like they're like someone like me, like I've never really watched this stuff. If you want to go back and you want to do Dragon Ball Z, how's this stuff accessible now? It's all on streaming. I'm assuming somewhere.
The manga like evergreen at this point.
Yeah, so the manga is very easily much available. I would highly recommend for like if you just don't want to go out and buy all the print editions. There's the Viz Media app, I believe, has every single chapter of Dragon Ball GT, and Super as well. And so like if that's what you want to do, if you just want to go on the manga side, that's completely fine. As far as the anime goes, if you want to watch like the original Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, oh, you know what? Actually, I do know this. A lot of it is actually coming to Crunchyroll right now because of Crunchyroll is acquiring Funimation. So,
Yeah, the merger's already happened, so it's all up on Crunchyroll.
yeah.
It is okay. That's what I was wondering. I assumed it was, but I hadn't looked it up yet. Yeah, I know that merger was not without its problems. So hopefully people are okay with it now. But yeah. Toby, you're gonna have to get your Dr. Slump manga out now. You're gonna have to go find the Dragon Ball out, give him a read.
I looked on my bookshelf and I got number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay, well there you go.
Yeah, I'm missing a
There's your
couple,
start.
and
There's
then
your start.
I got 7, 8, 9. Yeah.
That's cool. All right. Well, that is going to be the end of our talk there. Before we go, Julian, I think you had Christian is a big X-Men fan, and obviously Charlie here, our Omnibro. I think you had a couple questions you want to ask, or some this Western American comic book stuff. We talk about occasionally here on this podcast. Get that on before we get out of here.
Yeah, it's more of just a general like I guess conversation starter. So I think last time I was on here, I was talking about how I've started reading all of the Claremont X-Men run, like starting with Giant Size in omnibus form. But now at this point, I am now like in 87. And so I have started to branch out into other parts of the Marvel universe just because I got very curious because, Secret Wars really messed up a lot of the X-Men continuity. And I was like, well, I got to get the Secret Wars omnibus now because I need to reread this. And then that led me to wanting to know like more about like what was going on with like Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and stuff like that. And so with all of that, it's led me to just really... So the first superhero comic I read was in 1989, right? And then I didn't really go back very much. So watching like comics go from like 77 into the 80s now, it's so amazing to me to see like just how rapidly the medium of comic book storytelling evolved in this time. Like I just reread Daredevil Born Again. Which I had read as a kid. Like I think at summer camp, some kid let me borrow a trade with it, and I realize now rereading it that like all of the like deeper stuff completely went over my young head. But just looking at like the page layout and like the grittiness of it, it's so different from like John Byrne's Fantastic Four from just a few years before that, right? And I was thinking about like Jim Shooter saying that like the reason that they had to kill off Dark Phoenix is because she killed a planet, right? Even though it wasn't her control. So that character had to die because she had committed the ultimate sin of killing someone. And, you have like them dancing around what Wolverine does for years, right? And then you get into like the mid 80s and you get to a point where like Storm is like, hey, Wolverine, I need a witness or I need someone to interrogate. Do what you will with the rest. And it's like, oh shit. Like, it's just, like seeing just how much darker things get in the 80s and also just like the obvious, social, like ramifications of like what was going on in the comics, right? Like it's kind of crazy, when I see people these days, like not wanting X-Men to be, social or political, and it's like, dude, it was always there. Like it was really always super there. Like, did you not get it? Like it's not even subtext, it's just the text.
Yep. Yeah, no, Marvel in the 80s goes through quite a bit of, growing up. DC did too, right? I mean, comics in general did, right? So, yeah, but you've had a lot of these people that were raised on comics, right? So people that have read comics when they were younger, now they're adults and want to try something, it's not just like a random job for them. It's like, they're like, no, this is the thing I love. You get this a bit in the 60s and 70s at DC, but by Marvel, I think it really hits like in the 80s. Guys like Roy Thomas, he was like a comic fan, and when he started taking over stuff in the 60s, but yeah, you started to get some real dyed in the wool comic fans coming in, and yeah, stuff started to get a lot more mature. And that's, I think, the continuity of everything starts to come together, for good or bad, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there is something about the kind of free nature of the early Silver Age stuff, but you start to get, I think, better stories, more interesting stories. Yeah, it gets confusing for sure. Continuity can be a hamper on the the story people want to tell, but it's kind of uniquely American comics. It's a very, 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 very unique industry of storytelling. It's not really done like this anywhere else.
Yeah, and that's not even to get into all the retcons or and that like anything that gets like changed along the way. I mean, just look at Cable's origin in general. Like the amount of retcons and like changes this guy's had, you could literally like. I remember when Deadpool 2 was coming out and they announced that Cable was going to be in it. Everyone was like, "Well, no, Cable just needs a movie himself." If they were going to try to do that character, like the only way you could do that character is by saying like he's a time traveler. That's it.
You have the number one Cable fan here in the podcast, so Charlie can tell you all about Cable. Confirmed number one Cable fan because X-Men 2 at this era blows up. You start to see the miniseries in New Mutants, but then by the end of the 90s or by the end of the 80s, it is like, okay, now you have like 4 or 5 ongoing series, and in the 90s it just explodes, right?
Yeah, and that has definitely been like it's in a period of growing pains right now, where I can definitely tell that Claremont is having difficulty like juggling all of this stuff, and it's like there's stuff where it's like, wait, but what about these characters? You haven't even talked about them in forever. And like so I'm reading New Mutants. I've picked up the first 3 volumes. Mm-hmm. I hate New Mutants, guys. I think it's a bad comic, and but I need to see how they turn into X-Force, and I think I'm starting to see it now, because what it really boils down to is nobody gives a shit about the New Mutants. And so I can see like when this really charismatic guy with like big guns and stuff is like, hey, I'll take care of you. They're like, yes, please, because nobody else will. And they just go off with Cable, because like they literally disappear like from reality for a while. And at this point, Magneto's in charge of the school, and he's just like, I hope they come back. Doesn't try to find them, doesn't send the X-Men after them. And then when they come back, he's just like, well, you have to be punished because you left. And it's like, what's going on? Why are you doing this to these kids?
Yeah, as far as like when New Mutants becomes X-Force, like you could definitely see like with Rob Liefeld's like very first issue on New Mutants, you can see there's definitely a shift in obviously not just the art, and obviously besides just the art style, but also like the way that the book is written. Like you can see that like the kids are like more into like the adult figure that they have in their life. Because like they're just really looking at like, oh, Cable is so cool. Like, okay, we will do everything you say, but it's a very interesting contrast when you look at like the mentor figure that they had previously, which was Magneto, who basically they would always like kind of watch out for him and make sure he doesn't really go back to his like either his villainous ways, or that like they didn't really trust him fully.
Yeah.
And also like, to be honest, Magneto didn't do a damn thing to teach those kids anything.
He really didn't. It's awful.
No, I mean, Cable kind of comes in and just establishes it more as like a military school. And those who would get on board got on board, and those who didn't left. So that's essentially what X-Force becomes, is his own personal sort of strike team until he vanishes.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to see how that stuff happens. And it's interesting to see, like, I started to, I love 90s X-Men, right? That was like my wheelhouse. But like a lot of people make fun of like the costume designs of the time, but like it actually starts earlier than that. Like with like the New Mutants, like first official like non-student costumes are like very 90s, especially like Cannonballs and like Cypher. Like he's got like all of these like pockets and like belts on his costume, and it's like, dude, you just know languages. Like, why do you have like all these utility belts like on your costume? Like, what are those for? But you can definitely start to see that shift, and that's another thing that's been interesting is like seeing the change in art, right? And starting to see names that I recognize. Like right now, I'm reading Fall of the Mutants, and there's a 2-part story crossover with X Factor and Hulk, and it's McFarlane on Hulk, like during the Peter David run.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, yeah, there we go. Like we're in it now. Like we're getting to when I know comics, and it's really exciting.
In a weird way, like I've purged a lot of my collection, but one of the things that I loved about going through my collection was literally realizing, oh, that's a writer I like. I had no clue that they used to write Cable or they used to write this, because that's not why I was collecting the book at all at the time. But yeah, you totally will start to see that these really well-known writers and artists and that stuff were already doing the stuff that you loved before you knew why you loved it.
Yeah.
Well, this is the way comics have always worked, right? It was different back in the Golden Age and Silver Age, and some of the Silver Age stuff, because it didn't always credit the creators. But people would realize, oh, this is the good Donald Duck artist. Who is this guy? Oh, it's Karl Marx, right? Like, so they would figure this stuff out. It wasn't just some random person. Yeah, the reason all those books you liked, it wasn't because it was Hulk or Spider-Man. It's because of who was involved in it, right? So, eventually a lot of comic fans realize the characters are great, but without the creators, so that whenever you look back, you're like, oh yeah, well, I don't really care about Daredevil for 157 issues, but suddenly this Frank Miller guy. And Daredevil's amazing, right? Not the same that Daredevil was bad prior, but like it's just not the same thing.
No,
right?
but there's
a lot of people eventually make that jump from character to creator, and you start to realize, oh,
it was
these
funny.
are the
We
creators.
talked about this, Ryan. Like my favorite Captain America run was the Grunwald run, and I didn't even know that was a run. I always just thought it was like, that's when I liked Captain America, right? And it's not till like later the Epic collections came out. I'm like, wait, this is all the same guy that did my favorite run at the time.
Yeah, and widely regarded as one of the best runs of Captain America, right?
Yeah. Yeah, a good example of this is actually like one of my two of my favorite characters of all time are like Thanos and Adam Warlock. And honestly, it's not just, the characters are cool and stuff. Like I love them to death, but it's not the characters I love. It's the way that they were written and drawn by Jim Starlin that makes me love them so much. Like those, like the stories that he did, like in the 70s and the 90s, and even his like more recent stuff. Like all of it is because of what he did, and not because of what they were doing in the actual story.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, it was 90s Silver Surfer, right? With like I was there when Infinity Gauntlet started. And
hold on. I'm trying to recall. 90s Silver Surfer was hold on. Ron Lim?
Yep. Yeah, and I loved his art, and I learned about Thanos through Silver Surfer, and then I happened to be at a grocery store, like waiting for my mom to do shopping, and on a spinner rack was Thanos on the cover of this comic that I'd never heard of, and I was like, well, I need to know what this is, and so I got my mom to buy it for me, and then I was like, oh, this is important, and so I made sure to get like the rest of the story.
Yeah, Ron Lim did some of that Grunwald Cap stuff. So and again, when that came out, and when that Silver Surfer came out, I was reading it not knowing that it was all the same creators and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually read. I was actually reading a couple of those Ron Lim issues that he did with Mark Grunwald recently, and I what I noticed was that like his chins were so like he drew chins like a lot bigger than he would do later on. Like you could definitely tell that his because correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he did those issues before he did Silver Surfer.
I think it was before Surfer.
Yeah, so like you could definitely see that his art style is starting to like form, and like what he like the stuff that he did in Silver Surfer is starting to like collate and starting to like he's starting to like figure out what kind of artist he wants to be.
And apparently Marvel liked it because then they had him do like I don't know, like 5 books at once and an entire Marvel like card series like at the same time. You could tell I could tell that he was getting tired because it's like, oh, this is he did this a lot faster than he did like Silver Surfer. Like this isn't nearly as detailed.
Yeah,
I think I think Renlund is interesting because they really put him alongside some of the big creators, right? I'm like Keith go over Infinity Gauntlet when George Perez couldn't finish it. So and his art, like, it's very good. It's very clean. I don't think he gets quite the love that some of the other creators do from the same time period. But he was a workhorse. He did a lot of stuff, and he set the mood and tone for a lot of those books.
Yeah,
I really like his stuff.
Yeah, he was definitely Marvel's like go-to person whenever something needed to be like a bigger project needed to be done. Because he also he took over for Mark Bagley on Venom Lethal Protector. And as well as he would always like one shots. He would like for the first part of the Maximum Carnage crossover, Ron Lim did the first part and the last part.
The Spider-Man Unlimited, Unlimited, yeah, those issues, that's good stuff. Well, Julian, you are now a full Omnibro, so
I am.
Welcome to the club.
I blame Charlie, but it's a good place to be.
It is my garage. I have some boxes I need to figure out. I don't have no bookshelf space. I'm like, where do I put these things now? I'm a little out of room. I got a giant warehouse. I could start storing them there, maybe. But no, that's full of comic books. So, well, thank you guys very much. Unless you got any last thoughts, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Oh, I should actually get my.
I like how we had real proper comic talk, like on a anime manga episode.
Oh yeah. Well, Julian, he was like, he was actually supposed to be on before all this, before Toriyama, and I was like, I don't know what we're gonna do. We're gonna pivot. I got this Toriyama thing. He's like, oh, dude, I love Toriyama. I'm on anyway. I'm like, okay, good. So perfect. So yep.
Yeah. All I can really say here at the end is rest in peace, Akira Toriyama. Your work will live on forever.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank God I decided to wait till the very end of the episode to crash on me. There we go. I'll edit this all together. Maybe I'll edit this out. Maybe I won't. Who knows? We'll see. We'll give the audience something. I'll figure out where we got cut off. But before we go, Julian, you have some stuff you want to tell us. You have a brand new show. You have a new podcast I need to hear all about.
Is it called Lord Swift Pants?
No, but Toby, I am glad that you're here because after 11 years, 282 regular episodes, and 50-something special episodes, Nerds Without Pants ended in December of 2023.
Oh, man.
But out of the ashes comes something new. And actually just debuted last week in the first episode. My co-host Justin Ham and I are now doing a new show called The Stage Select. It is a video game variety show. Now, the quick elevator pitch is that it's like The Muppet Show, but for video games. Uh-huh. But really, more of my influences are like Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, or You Can't Do That on Television, or really like just think of like old like TV variety shows. So we're still going to talk about video games. That's our bread and butter. But interspersed between those conversations are random bits and dumb characters and pre-recorded, like we've got like fake commercials. I just cut together a trailer for the sequel to They Live called They Live Again, which I'm very proud of. That's going to air on a future episode. We went to space in the first episode. I wasn't expecting that. Like,
Shatner?
No, just me and my co-host. We just went to space and talked about some stuff. And we're just having a blast with it. And come on board, like watch the show evolve. It's rare that you can get in like at the ground level of like a brand new show and see it like just turn into just the most ridiculous shit, because we're just going to start trying to one up each other every week with like dumb bits and shenanigans, in addition to just like some really fun, thoughtful conversation about video games. You can find us anywhere that podcasts are available. You can follow the show on Twitter at Stage Select Pod. And yeah, I'm super excited about it. I'm having like, I've been podcasting for 13 years now, but I have never been like this, like energetic or jazzed about doing a show. I ended up listening to the first episode like 4 times between edits and everything and quality control to make sure that it sounded okay everywhere, and I was still laughing on that fourth go around, which is like a really good sign.
Nice. Very cool.
That's cool. Yeah, podcasting. It goes on for a long time.
Yes.
It sure does. Eventually it stops. Everything dies eventually, but sometimes they continue. What's that?
You keep teasing that one, Ryan.
Oh, this and Geekbox just until the grave, just keep it going. Keep it going. It's all good.
Heck,
No, it's great.
Heck,
It's great when
on even after you're dead.
it's great when people that run podcasts enjoy being on podcasts. That's it's more rare as time goes on. Let me tell you that. So
Yes.
yeah.
But I really appreciate you letting me come on and get the word out. Like, it's I didn't have any access to numbers before. That was one of the big problems with Nerds Without Pants. The other big problem was that we got delisted from Apple, which is another that's a little important if you want to be running a podcast.
Well, that's weird.
And so now seeing numbers come in, it's like it's very interesting, and especially with the first episode, I called in every favor. I was like, I need this to be shared by as many people to as many people as possible, because we're starting from scratch now.
Yeah. No, it's hard. I mean, I've seen so many podcasts launch, and they burn out super quick. Going, something like going a year, you're like in the top 2% of podcasts. So doing it for a decade is crazy. So few run that long. Starting over stuff, but that's good. That sounds exciting. Toby loves the Muppets and shenanigans, so
hell yeah,
you got him on board already.
Excellent.
Hell yeah.
We are going to wrap up this podcast. Julian, anything else you want to tell us where before I get to the regular stuff? You want to tell us where else they can find wonderful people can find you on the internet? Oh,
yeah. You can find me on Twitter at Julian_Titus. The link tree for the State Select is also there and on the State Select Twitter profile. I'm also on Blue Sky under Julian Titus. I don't post there as often yet, but eventually I will, especially if more people start to follow me on there. And yeah, just kind of keep looking to those two places. I'm just very excited. I really want to see. I think we're onto something special here, like something that could actually break containment, so to speak, as far as
nice.
the listenership. So I really want to see where we can go with this.
Cool.
It is so very dumb.
It's the best type. Christian, you're not much of a you don't have podcast or Patreon or any of the stuff people normally do when they come on here. You're just a regular old human.
Yeah,
you're just a regular old normal.
Yeah, I'm an American citizen.
Do you have any wonderful things you would like to share to the people out there listening? If they were, what was that Dragon Ball site? You remember referenced a couple times. People may want to check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's called kanzenshu.com. It's spelled Kanz. Let me just double check.
You don't have to double check anything on this podcast. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
It's kanzenshu.com. It's honestly the most accurate, and it's the most accurate website for Dragon Ball information you can honestly find. These people do their research, really in-depth research, and they've been doing this for almost 20 years.
And I've seen the site come up, linked all over, through the decades of being on the internet. I've seen this site come up in conversation all the time. So it's like, yeah, this isn't some random site it's never updated. No, it's still a really valuable resource.
Yeah, I just looked at it today, and they literally just posted something today.
Yeah. Anything else you want? You got a Twitter? You're on Twitter?
Yeah,
you're still over there.
Yeah, I'm on.
We'll follow you. Say hi to you.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at SSJCR65. The SSJ is actually Super Saiyan.
Kidding. We're all nerds.
Yeah, so there you go. But if anybody ever wants to say hi to me, I'm at Comics Conspiracy on Wednesdays usually. So
usually you and Lane are hanging out end of night, closing up shop with me. So that's always nice. Keep me company. Get me my Starbucks every now and again.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I tell people. If you hang out at the store, I eventually put you to work. I was hanging out at the comic store. The day Superman died. started working there. At Comic Conspiracy, I was running them errands before I started working there. So I pass it on to the next generation. You know, you hang out, you bother me enough, I'm going to eventually start paying you to bother me. So,
what can I say? I'm a good gopher.
Thank you to Charlie and Toby. Thank you guys for being on here, as always. And thank you to Edward at geekyvillain.com, Joe Duff, Kelsey May, Craig Anderson at the Executive Evolution Podcast, and Jimmy Rivera at the Social Forum Podcast, and everyone else that backs us at Patreon, patreon.com/Comic Conspiracy. You can head over to comicconspiracy.biz, buy some cool stuff from us. For pickup or mail order, or head over to the meanwhileanthology.com. We can find the anthology comic book that we made for our 30th anniversary with all sorts of super cool creators, including multiple people on this podcast. Do not forget to check out Brock's website at conspiratorbrock.com. She'll be back on next week. Charlie's Doctor Who podcast, Wanderers in the Fourth Dimension. What are you guys up to on Wanderers these days? What's your last episode?
So we've been
You're in the break time again.
Yes, we're in the break time again, but we've been covering some Big Finish box sets called the Doom Coalition. That's a bunch of Eighth Doctor stories that introduce a character called the 11 that we've been wanting to get to for a while.
Cool. Kevin also, he'll be back next episode, more than likely. He has the interview series called Between the Panels at fanbasepress.com. Make sure to check that out. And he also has a Page I Love, which is a art YouTube show that he talks with a creator about a page of art that they love, not by them. That's at Comic Art Live on YouTube. And my wife Leanne, she's at leannehill.com. And you can find her art at etsy.com/shop/LeanneHillArt, or you can buy it at the store as well. And a bunch of us are on Blue Sky as well. Ryan Higgins is myself. Brock is Brock Sager. Toby's Toby XI. Kevin is that Kevin Sharp. Stores on Twitter, ComicsCon Store. I mean, I'm still technically on Twitter. I just don't. I mean, I check it occasionally. I just don't post on there as much. Yeah, internet is very split these days. That's all right. It's it happens.
Yeah,
things happen.
I had to send you a post on Blue Sky because we're not mutual, so I couldn't DM you. And I was like, "Hey, I sent you a DM over on Twitter. Can you go read it?"
I'll follow you on Blue Sky.
No, not yet. Anyway, you might not have noticed that I was on there. Honestly.
What? Oh, fucking fix that! Boom! Look at that.
Well, thank you.
I probably didn't. Yeah, Blue Sky, slow start. It's it's never going to be Twitter, and it's not supposed to be. But that's okay. I don't know. Maybe Musk will sell the site someday, and I'll go back on Twitter. It's fine. And check out Geekbox. Should be on next week. What did we talk about this last week? We talked all about the piracy stuff. The Nintendo.
The Yozu.
Yeah. That was a big topic. We talked about that for a long time.
And all the man babies.
And our friends over at Manga Machinations, and I should check in on them. I'm sure they've done some good work covering Toriyama as well. So, well, that is it. That's a great episode. Thank you guys very much for being on. Julian, Christian, thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. And to everyone for listening, thank you very much. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.